The Kronos, along with other variants like the Chrome or the Nautilus, is known for having 9 synth engines. And it's not just Korg synthesizers, right? There are lots of other synthesizers from other manufacturers that have multiple synth engines. But what are synth engines? I'm sure people in the synth community would have a pretty good idea of what a synth engine is, but since the concept of this channel is to hopefully get non-synth players interested in what the world of keyboard players looks like, I thought I'd give it a go to explain what synth engines are in layman's terms, albeit maybe slightly nerdified. Now, I will say right away, I'm not a pro and I'm not a synth guru either. There are tons of much more knowledgeable YouTubers that probably know the history and inner workings of synth engines down to a science. I'm not one of those, probably not even close, but I think I know enough to do an explainer for beginners or non-keyboardists that are just curious to know what it means when Korg's marketing department says, hey, this keyboard has 9 synth engines. So a synth engine is the system that creates the sound that comes out of the keyboard. It's the tool that you use to program your sounds. So let's take the HD1 synth engine, for example. It's one of the 9 engines in the Kronos, and the HD1 synth engine consists of a sample library and a bunch of editing tools. When we say sample library, we're talking thousands of sound samples that have been recorded at some time. So literally, if you go through the library, you have essentially recordings of pianos, guitars, violins, brass instruments, percussion instruments, synthetic sounds, sound effects, and so on. And when I say recordings of instruments, it's not recordings of people playing songs with said instruments, but recorded samples for each note, so that if you play any note on the keyboard, it plays that note with the recorded sound of the instrument, like so. Right? So here we are in the library and we're browsing through some sounds, and as you can see, there are lots and lots of sound samples, and all of these are sounds the team at Korg at some point probably recorded and stuffed it into the HD1 engine. So you have this immense amount of basic sounds to choose from, and it's up to you to post-process the samples to your liking, right? As you can hear, this doesn't sound like much. So we need to edit it to make it actually usable, and you can do that because the HD1 engine is not just the library of sound samples, it also gives you a whole set of controls that allows you to specify how long it should take for the sound to decay, how you want to shape the sound so it sounds more muffled or sharper than the original sample or whatever, and what effects you want to add to the sample and so on. So for example, if I take this bell sample, I can now say I want it to sound more muffled, so I put the sample through the filter and add a low-pass filter to it, and I can decide how muffled I want it to sound, like so. Then I can go into the amp EG settings to set it so that the sound decays naturally if I keep the key pressed. I can make it so that the sound disappears quickly, like so. Or I can make it so that the sound keeps going for a long time before it decays to 0. I could even change the attack time so that the sound will take longer to fade in, like so. Okay, now that's not how a bell would sound in reality, but the HD1 engine lets you do that. You have the freedom to massage the sound to any way you like, and then I can add effects to this to make it sound more interesting, like so. So all these settings are part of the HD1 engine. It's the interface that allows me to mold my sound to my liking. And there's more, right? There's a ton of stuff that I'm omitting here to keep the video watchable, but again, all the controls together with the sample library containing thousands of recorded raw samples, all of this is the HD1 synth engine. It's a whole system that allows you to create sounds from scratch, and you can imagine the possibilities if you consider the amount of raw sound material from the library combined with all the modifications you can add to it. So here are some examples of sounds created on the HD1 engine. So that's the HD1 engine. It's a sample-based synth engine, and it's one of the 9 synth engines in the Kronos. And just to give you an idea of how other engines are different to the HD1 engine, let's look at the CX3 engine. The CX3 engine is a drawbar organ simulator. So it's an engine dedicated to accurately simulating an electric drawbar organ. So unlike the HD1, which has thousands of different sounds in its library, the CX3 is just organ sounds. No library, just organs. Right? It's simulating a real organ, so it's an entirely different concept. And just to give you some contextual knowledge, a drawbar organ in its original form is a keyboard instrument that was developed to kind of simulate the sounds of a pipe organ. I'll spare you the details, but it has multiple drawbars that each activate a sound, and this mechanism is simulated in the CX3 engine. This is part of the interface. And if you play a key and you have all drawbars retracted, there is no sound. But if I now pull this drawbar, now we hear the note. And the more I extend the drawbar, the louder the sound. And each drawbar emits a different note, which are perceived as overtones. Right? And by adjusting the drawbars, we can create very different nuances, just like we would do on a real drawbar organ. So here are some variations you can do. See how this is already completely different from the programming approach we had in the HD1 engine? And by the way, the HD1 engine does have drawbar organ samples in its library, so you can play organ sounds with the HD1 engine, but there it's just a sample, right? It's a static recording of a specific combination of drawbars that was selected at the time of the recording. Right? The HD1 engine compensates that by offering multiple organ samples so you can choose from those, but you don't have the flexibility of changing the drawbar controls to change tonal nuances to your own taste. So yes, you can make organ sounds with the HD1 engine, but if you want a more realistic organ simulation, you want to use the CX3 engine, and it's just sounding much more like an actual drawbar organ. And of course, the CX3 engine comes with all the other organ-related simulations like rotary speakers and built-in choruses and so on, but we'll skip those because I just wanted to show you the difference to the HD1 engine. And just to touch on one more synth engine, we have the AL1 engine, which is often referred to as an analog modeling engine. This engine is simulating old-school analog synthesizers that would emit a bass sound wave, and then we can put that through filters and EGs to add character to it. So this AL1 synth engine has 8 different bass sound waves that you can start off of, and we can quickly cycle through them to hear how they sound. So that's how the basic sound waves or oscillators sound. And these sound quite boring by themselves, but these are raw material, so to speak, and we can choose one of these and then we can add filters to it and modify the sound characteristics, like so. And of course, we can change how the sound should develop over time. Should it keep going flat like so? Or should it change filter values over time, like so? Or should it have a tremolo or vibrato, like so? And I can even add a secondary oscillator and make it play in a different key, like so. And so on. And if you combine all of these editing features, and again, I'm omitting a lot here, you can end up with very interesting sounding sounds. So here are some examples of sounds created just with the AL1 engine. See how crazy different they can sound? And it's all based off of the basic sound waves that originally sounded really boring, and the rest is just meticulous and creative editing. I think analog modeling synthesizers are what hardcore synth enthusiasts would consider real synthesizers, because it's not relying on recorded samples like we had in the HD1 engine, and it's not simulating other instruments like the organ simulation of the CX3 engine. It's actual sound synthesis that can only be done on synthesizers, right? It's not an imitation of real instruments. It is its own real instrument. This is what synthesizers are at their core definition: electric instruments that emit sounds based on sound waves generated electrically. So you see, we just scratched the surface of 3 engines, and it really just is the surface. So there's so much more you can do with these engines, but all of them have their own characters, all of them have their own way of sound generation. Roughly, you could say that the HD1 engine is good at imitating sounds of a wider range of instruments, the CX3 engine is good at authentically recreating organ sounds, and the AL1 engine is good at creating all kinds of synthetic sounds. And there are 6 more synth engines in the Kronos, each of them having a different concept, specialty, or quality to them. We're not going to talk about them in this video, but hopefully you now have a better understanding of what a synth engine is. And just to give you an idea of how this looks like in the actual Kronos interface, you have a library of sounds you can choose from, and any given sound could be based on a different synth engine. So they all coexist within one large encompassing system. Now, I said in the beginning that many synthesizers these days come with multiple synth engines, but this hasn't always been like this. In the old days, you'd have one engine per synthesizer model, and that was it. If you owned a CX3 organ, that was an organ, and you couldn't play any other sounds other than the organ sound it offered. It wasn't even a synthesizer. It's its own instrument. Right? And there were actual synthesizers that had sample-based engines similar to the HD1 engine we talked about earlier, but again, a synthesizer with a sample-based engine only had a sample-based engine. That was it. There were stage piano type keyboards that were really good at simulating piano sounds, but again, that was it. So back then, and we're talking about 1980s and 1990s, it was normal that one synth would come with one engine, and that had its own flair because it would make each synth very unique. There were sounds that you would only be able to produce with a specific synthesizer, so it made sense to buy a lot of different synthesizers to widen your range of sounds you'd be able to play. And then little by little, manufacturers would come up with synthesizers that would contain 2 or more engines that would widen the spectrum of sound characteristics you could generate using just one piece of hardware. And the Kronos has 9 of them, so virtually 9 synthesizers in one keyboard. And that's why Korg keeps emphasizing it, because as far as I know, there's no other hardware synthesizer out there that has this many engines in one. Now, does this make the Kronos the ultimate keyboard? For some players, maybe, but then again, there are so many other synthesizers out there, including a lot of single synth engine models, right? It's not that all synthesizers these days come with multiple engines. There still are tons of synthesizers that have one engine, and there are also a lot of synthesizers that have similar synth engines across different manufacturers. The AWM2 engine in the Yamaha Montage is a sample-based engine, similar to the HD1 engine in the Korg Kronos. Both of them have their own sample libraries. But even if these engines are based on the same concept, if they are coming from different manufacturers, they will have different libraries, meaning Korg recorded their sounds and Yamaha recorded their sounds. And while they both cover similar genres like piano samples, violin samples, brass samples, and whatever popular instruments there are, they are likely going to sound different, simply because they may have used different recording environments, different instruments, different performers, and so on. And then there is the user interface and editing capabilities. Each manufacturer will have their own operating system based on their own sound editing philosophy, which will give you varying sound creation experiences. And this goes for any other synth engine. There are lots of synthesizer engines developed by different manufacturers that are based on the same concept, but they are always going to be differences in flavors and usability and programmability and so on. So ultimately, most of the time, which engine you choose or which manufacturer you like comes down to taste and personal preference. But anyways, that's synth engines for you. And if you're new to synthesizers, I hope I was able to provide you with an idea of what synth engines are. If you found this interesting or enjoyable, please hit the like button. If you are interested to see more content similar to this one, or sometimes even nerdier content, please consider subscribing. And with that, thanks for watching and see you in the next one. Bye.